Welcome, everyone, this morning to our live stream on Biden's border crisis and how Texas can defend its borders. You know, we are at a really, really consequential point in the border crisis, the man-made, I would say Biden-made border crisis that's happening here, especially in Texas, you know, where everything that is happening is undercutting the rule of law and sovereignty of our state and our country. And it seems that Texas, instead of spending its time protecting our border, is spending more of its time fighting with the federal government on how to protect our border. And so with us today, we have two of my colleagues, Josh Treviño and Ammon Blair, joining me. And we also will have a message from our other colleague who is traveling today and couldn't make it, Rodney Scott, former chief of Border Patrol. But before we get to that video, I did want to properly introduce Josh and Ammon. So for those of you who don't know my colleague Josh Treviño, he's chief of research and intelligence. Prior to joining TPF, well, he's been at TPF a couple different times, but he was vice president of strategy at Illinois Policy Institute and also worked for Pacific Research Institute. He was also worked for Booz Allen and was a speechwriter for the George W. Bush administration and a former United States Army officer and a graduate of Furman University and that university up the road, University of Texas.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
thanks for joining us, Josh. Yeah. And a native, most importantly, a native of Corpus Christi and Laredo in South Texas. Yeah. And of course, we have one of our newer colleagues, Ammon Blair, who just joined us late last year. Ammon was former Border Patrol agent for several years. Prior to that, he served in the U.S. Army, and he brings with us a wealth of experience of actually being on the ground, protecting our nation's borders. So, Ammon, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right, so obviously Rodney Scott is a former chief of Border Patrol and was a Border Patrol agent for over 30 years. And we wanted him to join us, just didn't work out with his travel. So wanted to kick it over to a short video message that he did want to have to kind of highlight some of the issues that we're seeing at the border. So I will cut to that.
Hello, my name is Rodney Scott. I'm currently a Senior Distinguished Fellow for Border Security and Immigration at Texas Public Policy. But I'm the retired chief of United States Border Patrol, and I argue that even more important than being chief, I was a Border Patrol agent for almost 3 decades. So I want to talk a little bit about what's going on today and why, and maybe a couple things about how we can stop this. The border crisis that we're seeing today, and please don't underestimate it. This is not just a border crisis; it's a national security crisis. Is the result of intentional actions taken by the Biden administration. And for those of you that don't know, I was chief under the Biden administration for the first 6 months. So I sat in the meetings, I had discussions, I know how this administration thinks, and that's why I'm very confident in saying that it's intentional. This administration campaigned on tearing down all the border security initiatives that have been put in place during the last administration and even more, and they did exactly that. So what are the results? Well, there in Texas, you're seeing the massive numbers of people crossing the border on a daily basis. The articles of impeachment the House just put forward, Chairman Green estimated over 10 million illegal aliens have entered the United States under the Biden administration. Of note of that, what I really want to focus on, though, is the 1.8 million documented gotaways under the Biden administration. What that means is those are illegal aliens that Border Patrol has actually identified through sensors or actually seen them on camera coming across the border, but they're out of resources. They can't respond. But even more important than that, especially in South Texas, I want people to understand there's not a lot of technology along the border in Texas. So there's vast open areas, remote areas where there's no persistent surveillance and there are no Border Patrol agents. So we have no idea what's crossed through those areas. But what we do know is everything that crosses through those areas and that 1.8 million known gotaways did everything they could to avoid interacting with law enforcement. They simply were not asylum seekers, as this administration tries to claim that everybody is. The other really important thing is the Border Patrol has documented that they've caught people from over 170 different nations. Almost 300 people have been on the National Terrorist Watch List now that Border Patrol has actually encountered. That means they waited or Border Patrol stumbled on them. But we don't know what was in that 1.8 million. Statistically, though, we know, first off, what I mentioned, they did not want to get caught. They got away. So why? In my experience, The people that actually try to evade Border Patrol the hardest and pay the cartels more money to get away from us, it's because they have a criminal record or they think we know something about them that's going to prevent them from being released. And that's really the last thing I want to talk about here, most importantly. What is the cause of this massive flow? It's more complicated, but the most simple thing to think about is catch and release. This administration reinstituted catch and release almost immediately upon going into office. What that really means is Border Patrol arrests somebody. This administration reduced the detention space and actually put a ton of pressure on me when I was chief. The U.S. Border Patrol and Customs and Border Protection put pressure on them as well to find ways to release people, to parole people into the United States, and they created this new parole program. But don't overthink this one either. Why this second wave? Because every single person that gets released into the United States does exactly what you or I would do. They simply call home and tell their friends and family. They check in and tell them how the trip went and what happened. And when people back home hear that they were arrested and then almost immediately released, and then a non-governmental organization gave them food, water, new clothes many times, and a free plane ticket to the city they wanted to go to, then 2, 3, 4 more come for everyone. So I just want to close with highlighting this is intentional. This entire border crisis was created by policy decisions, and this administration, contrary to what you're hearing coming out of them currently about they need legislation and everything else, sure, that would help. They don't need it. They intentionally opened the border. They could intentionally shut down the border.
Great. Well, gentlemen, I think that's a great kind of precursor to our conversation today. You know, and I want to start kind of taking a little bit of a step back about how we got here. And Rodney talked a little bit about some of those issues, but you know, this has been something that for decades we've been talking about border security. You know, going back, you know, predates many people may be watching even, you know, their lives, right? This has been a constant issue. But how did we get from what our good friend Tom Homan has said, the most secure border in our lifetimes, to the most insecure border in our lifetimes? And maybe Josh, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. Look, there's two big phenomena to understand and how we got here from this, exactly as Tom said, most secure border in our lifetimes to the most insecure border, not just in our lifetimes, but probably in American history. Two things had to happen to get us to this stage. One is that, and this is a phenomenon that we've been documenting here at the Foundation for quite some time, the Mexican state and the cartels have essentially entered into a synthesis with one another. So we need to understand it's no longer a phenomenon of either individual migrants coming across. All of them are trafficked. All of them are trafficked by human trafficking cartels. And the Mexican state at large operates with them, shares in the profits, shares in operational details, and so on. So that's one thing that had to happen. The other thing that had to happen that's much more proximate now is that the Biden regime actually had to enter into a partnership with the Mexican state cartel regime, which they absolutely have. This is something that we've been talking about publicly at the Foundation since last summer, including your article in the Federalist from this past summer, which predicted correctly that as the 2024 election season came along, the Biden regime, very concerned about a re-election that's candidly uncertain on their part, would enter into a partnership and a deal with the Mexican regime, the state cartel Mexican regime, to effectively do a few different things. One of which is suppress illegal migration temporarily for the election period. The other, though, was looking at the price that the Mexicans themselves would extract, which we have found is the attack on border infrastructure and the state of Texas exercising its sovereignty to control the border. So as part of that, the Mexicans have been demonstrating that they actually can open up the border if they so choose, which they've done. We now have this really terrible situation for Texas in which you have a Mexican state cartel regime on the south side of the Rio Grande and a regime in Washington, D.C. that's determined to prevent Texas from defending itself. And that's how we got here.
Great. I want to get back to the Mexico side of this and the nexus with the cartels. But before we do, Ammon, you know, obviously you were on the ground for many years down in Texas along the border. You know, what did you see change tactically and strategically that has led to this crisis?
Well, by changing the policies specifically about prosecutorial discretion. So when Chief Scott was in, like he mentioned in his video, those policies that they were trying to force him to change to figure out a way to catch and release everyone that we were apprehending, that was all based off of prosecutorial discretion. So at that time, when someone came across, typically you're supposed to go through a set of guidelines or questions like to understand if they do actually have credible fear. But that is no longer the case. We now base our decisions as Border Patrol agents on whether you're going to be released based off of your nationality and whether you have a family unit or if you have a criminal record that we actually have access to. So it's no longer if you're actually have an asylum case or if you're going to claim asylum. A lot of times we don't even ask that question. Those questions are not even asked. The question that we're supposed to also ask whether they are able to go through the parole process are also not asked. Everything is based off of nationality. So when people figured that out, massive waves started coming across immediately within the first month of the Biden regime. And because of that, all of our resources as a Border Patrol agent had to go to where the massive amounts of crowds of illegal aliens were going. And the Mexican cartels dictated where those massive groups were. So every place that you go along the border, whether that's Eagle Pass, what we're seeing right now, or whether that's in Roma, in my station, the Mexican cartels choose which areas they're going to flood the area with massive amounts of illegal aliens. That way, because each area along the border, they designate which areas for massive amounts of illegal aliens, which areas also designated for special interest aliens, or those who want to get away, the 1.8 or 1.9 that Chief Scott talked about, and then also narcotics, weapons trafficking, and arms trafficking. And so when the National Guard went there under Eagle Pass, and they were able to secure that area, what they did is they took down one of those processing centers. And so because of the massive amounts of people that were coming across, we also didn't have the resources to bus them to our processing centers. So the Border Patrol, what they did is they created outdoor processing centers on the river. And then they would have agents assigned to that area. And so really what we did is we facilitated the illegal immigration right at the point of river. We made it so easy for everyone to come across, to literally go across and then walk to us so that we didn't have to do anything. And they just stood in line waiting for us to somewhat process them, not ask about their status of whether they're going to claim asylum, and then utilize NGOs and other organizations or our own buses to then take them either to, like in the Rio Grande Valley, we had contract through the Catholic Charities, or we would take them specifically to like the airport or the bus station.
So why did you stop asking those questions? Is that a directive from Border Patrol, and what's the reason behind stopping ask those questions?
Yeah, it was all based off of that directive of prosecutorial discretion. They advised us that based off of their nationality, whether that was if you're from Mexico or one of the Central American countries, or even China, what they did is they're like if they meet that requirement, then you see if they're actually a family unit. If they have a kid, then it's also based off of how old that kid is. And then once you get their record checks through fingerprints, then that's how we did it. And so right at the very beginning, it was all based off of the policy or memo, because it's not law. Prosecutorial discretion is not law. It's all based off of just a memo and word of mouth. And then that's kind of how we stopped asking all the credible fear questions and also the parole determinations to consider parole.
Yeah. So, Ammon, that's a really good point. And Josh, I think it shows that this is all intentional, led by this administration to allow this flood of folks to come across. Obviously, we have what I would say is a little bit of a constitutional crisis, right? You know, the governor himself has said that the federal government has broken its compact with the states. You know, can you kind of go a little bit more in depth into the constitutionality of what is happening and Texas' stance on that? I know you're not a legal scholar, but you've studied and written a lot about this.
Yeah, no, that's right. But I'm unencumbered by
that's right.
So I can speak clearly on the topic. Look, the Constitution guarantees that the federal government will defend states from invasion and provide a small R Republican form of government. And the argument that Texas is correctly making in the current crisis is that the federal government has chosen, not failed, but actively chosen, per Ammon's point, to abdicate its responsibilities in those vein. So, because the founders envisioned a lot, and they actually did conceive partially of something like this, although, I think there's an argument to be made that they didn't fully conceive of a scenario in which a federal government would actively conspire with a foreign power to undermine one of its own states, which is exactly what we have now. But the states do have recourse, at minimum, against invasion. I want to be clear what I mean by invasion, by the way, Greg,
Sure.
because there's some confusion out in the public square on this part. You have a lot of our friends on the left who say that migrants arriving is not an invasion. Somebody emigrating in search of a better life is not an invasion. It's actually true. It's not. But the contention that we make, the state of Texas is making, is that we have to understand the nature of what's happening at the southern border right now, because it's orchestrated, because it's 100% controlled by criminal cartels, because those criminal cartels actually are killing Americans by the tens of thousands right now with fentanyl and by other means, and finally, because those cartels are existing in cooperative synthesis with the Mexican state, with foreign powers, not just the Mexican state,
Yeah.
they're the proximate ones. It actually does qualify as what the founders, and we've got research published on this, is what the founders would understand as an invasion. Think of piracy as a comparable example, or an insurgency from a foreign power, or something like that. So the states, so it is an invasion in the constitutional sense. We have to understand that. And we also have to understand that the states, under Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution, actually do have the power to defend themselves against invasion. And that's really what the state of Texas is invoking at this point. Now, I don't think the founders envisioned that Texas would have to defend itself against both the foreign invader and also the federal government that was cooperating with the foreign invader. But that's the times we have now, and it really illuminates, I think, the extraordinary, unprecedented, radical extremism of the Biden regime in this current crisis. So calling it a constitutional crisis, 100%, but we need to understand who the responsible party is. It's not here in Texas, it's in Washington, D.C.
And to further paint that picture, right after Christmas, Secretary Blinken and Secretary Mayorkas actually went to Mexico and met with President of Mexico, AMLO, and other officials, and talked a lot about about this issue and the, as they called it, unprecedented migration happening at our southern border, and have tried to, I would say, they've had a corrupt bargain with the Mexicans as far as how to handle this, understanding the politics that are involved, right, in an election year, and maybe some of the issues that could have in their campaign. Can you talk a little bit about where those negotiations have gone, what they have, what the policies coming out of that are,
Yeah.
and then further showing how that has led to dereliction of duty of what the federal government's supposed to be doing at our border.
Absolutely, and you're entirely right. On December 28th, the Secretary of State returned from Mexico City, having met with the President of Mexico, who he and the President of the United States has described repeatedly as a partner. Let's understand who this partner is. The current President of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, is a Mexican president who is in open alliance with a variety of Mexican cartels, principally the Sinaloans. He's leveraged them to generate election wins. He's gone and paid respects to the mother of El Chapo. Just last May, he gave a speech in Veracruz declaring that if the Americans attacked cartels in Mexico, he would use the Mexican armed forces to defend the cartels, his own criminal cartels. So this is a man who is almost, I'll borrow from a friend here, full Panama 1989 in terms of his open allegiance and alliance with criminal cartels who are trafficking into the United States. But this is who the Biden regime sees as its ally. And so exactly to your point, what they've done multiple times, most recently on December 28th, is sent senior personnel down to Mexico City to negotiate a corrupt bargain with the Mexicans. And the bargain is this. The Mexicans will temporarily suppress their trafficking operations, from which they derive, by the way, huge profits in the billions of dollars when you count remittances and fees and so on, in exchange for the federal government in the United States suppressing Texas's efforts to control the border. We have to understand this. They being the Mexicans, really fear Texas's efforts to control the border, specifically because, and it's not on grounds of humanity, by the way, the Mexican regime could not care less about the welfare of the average migrant, the average Mexican, the stewardship of their own country. I'm half Mexican. Mexicans are generally good people. I think we can agree. But this is a regime that cares nothing for it. What they do care about is the money. And Texas, in erecting border infrastructure, in trying to seize control of illegal migration across the border, is threatening that supply of the money. And that's why they've demanded, with success, that Washington, D.C. intervene against Texas. It's no accident, Greg, that the day after Secretary of State Blinken returned from Mexico City, the U.S. Department of Justice announced its latest lawsuit against Texas to try and get us to stop from defending ourselves. And thank God, really, for Governor Abbott for refusing to bend to that.
Yeah. The state legislature and governor and lieutenant governor have been, trying to fill that void. And I'm actually wearing my "Come and Take It" flag today, or tie today, so it seems appropriate. But obviously, Ammon, I gave a speech about a year and a half ago where I talked a little bit about how the futures of Mexico and Texas are tied together. Right, we share a lot together: culture, heritage, and history. But what is happening in Mexico is really started to force the hand, and in the federal government has forced the hands of Texas to kind of fill the void and fill the gap. So from your experience and what you're seeing, when you're in Border Patrol and what you're seeing today, can you talk a little bit about what Texas has done to try to step in and fill that void that the federal government's unwilling to do? And I want and start getting into that further, some of the confrontations that have been created between the state and the federal government because of that.
Sure. So like I said before, because we invited everyone in, and so it forced all agents to then have to process or to bus all the illegal aliens that were coming in. And so every single one of our resource had to go to that. And so that's when the state had to step in, and they had to fill in the gaps. In certain regions, like in my particular area, it was about 68 river miles. And some days we would have less than 10 agents to patrol the border, and that's not possible. Especially given the size of the Mexican cartels, their operations throughout the entire area. And unfortunately, when they would strategically send large, massive groups on each end of our area. So they would send a large group in close to Rio Grande City. At the exact same time, they would send groups in Roma. And it would completely split our station, all the agents that were assigned out there. And so now the state of Texas had to come in. They had to bring in the state troopers. They brought the state troopers inside of our tactical operations center so they could see everything that was going on. They could see the cameras. And then also the Texas Army National Guard, not only did they have to go out there to witness what was coming across, using the observation posts on the river, but they also had to then go into vehicles and also try to either apprehend or push back all the people that were actually trying to evade us. And so really that's how the state actually had to step up. They actually had to take the role and responsibility of Border Patrol agents in order to try to stem the tide of not only the massive groups, but also the narcotics, the weapons trafficking, everything. So really, the Border Patrol became a humanitarian relief agency, and the focus then shifted on the state to actually do everything else in regards to border security.
Yeah, which kind of puts both units in what they're not really meant to do, right? Like Texas was never, meant to protect the border, and Border Patrol is never meant to be a humanitarian agency. So, Josh, obviously Texas passed a series of laws to try to further help at the border. Can you talk a little bit about those and kind of where we go? Because obviously SB4, one I know that you'll talk about, is going to go into come into law soon and will start being enforced. And so kind of want to tee up, what's happening there.
SB4, which passed in special session last autumn, to me is the centerpiece of Texas's efforts. Operation Lone Star has been going on for a while. It's done a lot of good. It's established a lot of really good precedent in terms of the state's ability and prerogative to defend itself, although obviously we prefer the federal government to do its job. But absent that, Texas has shown that it has the capacity to do it. So Senate Bill 4, passed in special session last autumn, gives Texas the ability to actually apprehend and de facto, deport individuals caught crossing illegally, which is between any port of entry. Now there's, 28 ports of entry in Texas, something like that. It's more than a couple dozen, so there's plenty of options if you want to enter the state legally. But at the same time, what this does is it empowers Texas in ways that Texas has not been empowered for some time. We need to understand kind of a little bit of the historical context for this to really grasp what SB4 does. SB4, contrary to what you see reported in media and from a lot of our friends on the left, is actually not a radical act. SB4 doesn't establish new state powers. It doesn't seize anything that Texas didn't have before. What ended up happening is prior to 2012, there was a court case called Arizona versus U.S. that in candor the Supreme Court wrongly decided, sort of Obama-era majority leftist Supreme Court, that decided that states had no role in immigration policy. But the reality, as Justice Antonin Scalia discussed in his very memorable dissent, I encourage everyone to go look it up, between the ratification of the Constitution in 1789 and 2012, everybody thought the states had plenary powers of those within their borders. And so what Arizona versus U.S. did was establish this novel, this completely new legal regime in which states could do nothing about defending their communities, adjudicating who enters their territory from an international border, and so on. SB4 reasserts Texas' historic prerogative and the historic prerogative of the states in asserting that power, and is, in our analysis, a restorative act that allows the state to defend itself. And so we're very excited to see it come online, I think on March 5th.
Yeah, coming up right around Texas Independence Day.
Yeah.
Appropriately enough. So, Ammon, obviously with that coming online, what is happening now to prepare for that, right? Because there's a lot that has to go in place from when that bill was passed a couple months ago to being able to actually enact it and act on it. And so can you talk a little bit about how Texas is preparing to actually enforce SB4 and maybe some of the things that are being put in place to see if we can actually return some of these folks back across the border?
Sure. As it stands right now, Border Patrol has always been doing that, usually with Mexican nationals, voluntarily returning them through the port of entry. In fact, they're still doing it today with also other countries of they're taking them back to whether that's Hidalgo POE or whatnot. So really, right now, the National Guard and DPS troopers have been aiding Border Patrol in doing that already. So the process itself of once they reach across the border, apprehending them, and then being able to just ship them back to the ports of entry has already been happening since 2021, since Operation Lone Star began. Now the other issue though is when they come across and they say that they want to go through the process of seeking asylum or any other immigration-related terms or parole itself, that's going to be a little more difficult for like the county sheriffs and everyone else. But the entire process itself under SB4, we've already been doing that mission, especially when I was on Operation Lone Star. I was also an officer in Operation Lone Star, so I kind of jumped ship a little bit for the Border Patrol. I kind of wanted to help the state's mission out.
Yeah.
And I was somewhat in the same area. I was in the McAllen area. And we pretty much, as the Border Patrol was doing humanitarian relief with the massive wave, we were out there. We were actually pushing groups back. We were apprehending. We were doing everything other than actually taking them to the ports of entry, where we just had to wait for a transport van of Border Patrol agents or assist them to take them to the POE. So the entire, the Texas Military Department and also DPS, they already know the entire process itself. It's just now allowing the one difficult issue, though, is whether Mexican immigration at the port of entry is going to accept them or not. What many people don't understand is when we were doing this, even under the Trump administration, as Border Patrol, under the Protection Protocols, MPP, sometimes we would take them back, and then even as federal agents, Mexican immigration would not take them back. And so we had to take them back from Hidalgo POE, take the buses and send them actually north into Laredo, and then push them into that state, as the state of Tamaulipas would not allow us to push them. So that agreement it's going to have to be, again, like what Greg Abbott did before, Governor Abbott, when he worked individually with each state governor south of us to try to allow that process, because before they have kind of forced our hands as Border Patrol agents to bus illegals to other ports of entry.
Okay, that's very helpful. And Josh, I want to get into the states. Before we do, if you're watching live, we're going to get to a Q&A here in about 15 minutes. So if you have any questions, please make sure you get those in, and we'll get those asked here to our panel. So Josh, obviously, Texas has been left holding the bag. Other states, the RGA issued a letter. I think every Republican governor except for the Vermont governor signed on to this letter saying they support Texas. Can you talk a little bit about what the other states are doing to support our efforts here, and what has happened and what you expect to see happen?
It's been very, very, very heartening to see all the Republican governors. I'm sorry, it's a partisan issue. It should be a national issue.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
in candor, there's 3 other border states. They've got Democratic governors, and they too have a compelling interest in border control for the for the sake of their own communities. But it's been great to see half the governors in America stand up and say that they agree with Texas. They agree on what's happening at the border. They agree on what the federal government has done in terms of abdicating its responsibility and breaking the compact that underlies the Constitution. So that's all good. I also want to express, as a Texan, gratitude to the handful of states. I don't recall exactly the number. Maybe you do. It's 10, I think, states who double check that number, Internet, who have actually sent guardsmen to the border. My prediction is that there's going to be a need for a lot more of that. If I could urge these other state governors who have expressed, empathy for Texas and agreement with our position, please send your National Guard personnel to help with Operation Lone Star. We need it. There's always a danger that the feds are actually going to federalize the Texas National Guard, take that tool out of our kit. And so in that case, it would be an honor as a Texan, I mean this sincerely, to be defended by Floridians, men from Idaho, and so on. I think that would be really good, and it would send a message to Washington, D.C. as to actually who runs the country.
Yeah, absolutely. Texas has often been defended by those outside of our own state, right?
You can go to the Alamo and see the flags, flags of origin. So, yeah.
That's absolutely right. Hanging on that, so what happens if the federal government federalizes the National Guard, and what does that mean for Operation Lone Star? So maybe I'll start with you, Ammon, on that. And then what happens, why couldn't they just federalize the rest of the guards coming this way? And so I'll go to you after that, Josh, but first to you, Ammon.
Sure, it's gonna be really difficult for them to do that. Under the Insurrection Act, they could try that. The last time they did that was in 1992 for the LA riots, and it'd be really difficult. One, they would have to go through Congress. Now there is a Supreme Court case back in 1990 where they actually don't have to have the governor's approval to federalize them, but it has to be for a training purpose. Now here's also the situation. As a National Guard, you have 2 parents, really. You have the state and you have the federal government. A lot of the men and women that are currently in Operation Lone Star under the Texas Military Department are going to be deploying within the next 2 years. And so they're going to have to go off the mission anyway to do pre-deployment training and everything else for that federal mission. And so what I could see, unfortunately, is them utilizing and saying, hey, since we do have to do that train up, we're going to pull them under this Supreme Court case and state, yes, we do need to train you up for the pre-deployment. And then every eyes and ears on the border itself would be gone. What we would be left with is either, and if they tried doing that, if the Biden tried doing that with other states, if they do send their National Guard, luckily they're also sending their Highway Patrol. So you'll see Florida Highway Patrol down there as well. And then also Governor DeSantis said he would also send his state guard. So the state defense force within each state, they could also send their state defense forces to do somewhat of the same mission if they have the training and capacity to do so. And the Biden administration would not be able to do any federal orders for them.
Okay. So, Josh, help us understand politically, like, if that happened, I think a weakness that the President Biden has to look at going into this election is what's happening at the border. And so we've already seen the deal with Mexico, and maybe the numbers have gone down in certain areas and things like that. Could we see that to make it sound like we got the crisis under control? Although no laws have changed since he took office, and he could have kept doing the same things that were keeping it under control. But having said that, why would you want to perpetuate this crisis? Because it's such a political liability. What is the long-term gain for those who are wanting to do this? Like, why do this?
You have to understand the ideological perspective of the left in America now. They are a movement writ large. I'll overgeneralize a little bit, but not by much, that doesn't really understand patriotism as traditionally understood. They don't have any kind of intellectual or emotional purchase in inheritance and history and heritage. Which is why, this is external to the border, but look at the wave in the past half decade, plus actually the past decade of destruction of monuments and statues. They just removed Thomas Jefferson, I believe, from New York City Hall in the past week. So when you have this unmooring from everything that America is and is supposed to be, then the United States becomes an administrative unit. It's not really a country anymore. And so when you start thinking of it that way, it's a tax farm basically for the ruling elite. Then you want to people it with people who you think are going to be more amenable to you. And you probably also want to edge out a population that you may regard as ungovernable, recalcitrant, backwards, retrograde, whatever adjective you want to put on it. And that's really what's underlying this. I think it's important to understand that Washington, D.C. and the progressives it's not that they love the migrants and hate us. They hate us both. They hold us both in contempt. They hold us in contempt because we love freedom, because I'll just say it, we're real Americans. Like, we believe in the things that America is supposed to stand for in Texas. But they also hold the migrants, all these millions, and they are millions of trafficked individuals, they hold them in contempt too, because they regard them as effectively chattel. There's nothing moral in them that makes them look at millions of trafficked individuals, the women among whom, of all ages, have been raped along the way. And that is 100% true. And there's nothing in them that triggers the thought, maybe we should put a stop to this traffic. Maybe we shouldn't have human trafficking. Maybe we shouldn't allow a young girl to be taken from the Darien Gap to Dallas to work in slavery and also to be bought and sold along the way. There's nothing there that says in them that that's an intrinsic wrong. And so that's what underlies all of this. It's the pursuit of money on the one hand, but also it's the pursuit of a vision of a country that means nothing, because a country that means nothing and a people that mean nothing are easy to rule. And that's really what's underlying all of this.
Yeah. And, I think that's the part that is like so mind blowing to me, right? Like, you can understand why people might want to come here to work and all these things. We've had that for decades. But the fact that as a people and as a government, we just allow the human carnage associated with this, whether it's from fentanyl, it's the human trafficking, the sex trade and all that stuff, to continue and to perpetuate, and we just do nothing about it is I think the most morally incomprehensible thing that's happening amongst this. And so, as Texas continues to fight back, Ammon, obviously there's a lot of confrontations. We had one over the buoys, we had one over the razor wire, we have one now in Shelby Park in Eagle Pass. Can you talk a little bit about what is happening in those cases, and especially I think the Park one, because that one could be unfolding today, tomorrow, who knows, because the Attorney General said we're not going to give it back to you, and the feds are saying, well, we want access, and kind of where that could lead as far as this crisis continues to unfold.
Sure. So people know, when you're a Border Patrol agent, you have warrantless access to private property within 25 miles of the border. And it's been that way since the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. However, it does not state that a Border Patrol agent is supposed to aid and abet illegal entries into the United States, and which is against the law under 8 U.S. Code 1324. And so what they're stating is, because the Border Patrol agents, or I shouldn't say the agents, they were directed to do so, were directed to create that outdoor processing facility in that park. They made a direct line of illegal entry from Mexico into the U.S. into that park specifically, and Governor Abbott in the state of Texas is like, we're not going to deal with this anymore. You're aiding and abetting this invasion. You're part of it. You're coordinating it. And we're going to shut it down. And so right now what they're saying is that is illegal. You can't get involved in immigration. However, the Border Patrol agent under law, it never states, or even under prosecutorial discretion, does it state that we are to aid and abet illegal entries. And really that's what happens. So unfortunately, with boots on the ground, it's kind of turned into a Cold War. Mm-hmm. And it's sad. You see agents that were previously for border security now get into whether that's fights or disagreements with the Texas National Guard and DPS troopers on the ground, where they're saying, hey, we're not going to allow you to aid and abet illegal entries, so now you're not going to be on this property anymore to do so. And because of that, whether that's because of arrogance or whether that's because of careerism with the Border Patrol, it has now created massive contention. Even so, what's happening kind of like in Eagle Pass is kind of like a microcosm of a macrocosm events that's happening between the Biden administration and Abbott in the state of Texas. And so now, unfortunately, we're seeing it on the guys that are supposed to be helping each other and working with each other on the line, protecting our citizens, are now at odds with each other. And so it could get into that situation. And then also with the drownings, what they're now stating is that we denied access to help those 3 that did drown.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, those drownings happen, unfortunately, all the time. And that is because we've incentivized illegal immigration. The cartels choose where those people go, and then that's where they go. And it happens all across, not just the state of Texas, but it happens across the entire southern border. And that's why the UN even declared our border is the most dangerous in the world. They declared it in that entire trek that you declared from Darien Gap to here as the most dangerous. So now, unfortunately, what they're going to try to do, they may try to do, is try to pen those drownings and the safety of illegal aliens coming across on the Texas National Guardsmen, and actually try to have lawsuits against them individually, not the state, not the actual Texas Military Department, but go after the sergeant that was on guard at that time and go after him personally.
So that, and we're about to get to audience Q&A, so please get your questions in if you have them. But I want to hang on that point because, you know, it can seem like a thankless job, right? To be Border Patrol, be an Operation Lone Star, be down there away from your families, especially on the Operation Lone Star point. What does this do for the morale, right? Like, because you talked about, like, these are agencies and people are supposed to be working together, and now there's this contention and this it's a great way of putting it, this Cold War that's broken out amongst agencies. What is the morale like amongst Border Patrol and the Texas Military Department, and how do we bridge that and improve that? Because that's got to be really, really dire.
You know, it's sad. Right before I left, the Border Patrol understands that there's a morale problem. They just refuse to admit it's because of open border policies and not allowing agents to do their job. So even within the United States Border Patrol, you have a Cold War going. You have agents that want to secure the border. You have agents that love this mission. They love the idea of protecting the American people and the Constitution of the United States, which we swore an oath to protect. But then you also have people within the organization that have also kind of drank the Kool-Aid of Mayorkas and the open borders agenda, where they now think of the safety, the order, the humanity of illegals coming across into the United States above the protection of American citizens. And because of that situation, seeing trafficking almost daily, and that's really what led me here to TPPF, was seeing child trafficking happening before my eyes and not being able to do anything about it.
Yeah.
And because of that, seeing that on a daily basis, the Border Patrol started bringing in motivational speakers. They knew that there was a problem, and they even brought like Marcus Luttrell to each station. They would bring motivational speakers to talk to us. And then on the other hand, you see DPS troopers and then National Guard soldiers really frustrated with their fellow Texans as to, hey, why aren't you guys doing this job? We're having to do it for you, and we're both Texans. And so you see this frustration, you see the morality in there, and now you're starting to see also media now attacking them personally.
Yeah.
Especially going after the people in Eagle Pass personally, trying to find out media going after each of those personally. Your own federal government, who you now belong to, you belong to both the state and the federal government, also saying the same thing. You're seeing fellow comrades also in active duty going after you as well. So it's this not just a Cold War between Border Patrol agents and National Guard and DPS troopers in the state. You're now seeing it within each agency as well.
Yeah. And it's a really good point. And, you know, I think the thing that's really frustrating, to get back to an earlier point, is you think, you know, it's clear the left thinks that what they're doing is more humane, but what they're doing is allowing this human wreckage to continue, right? Like the child trafficking, the assaults that happen on women, children, you know, the indentured servitude that's happening to every single person that comes across, right? You know, the title of the speech, Josh, that I gave in Mexico, you were there, was "No one crosses for free." And that's
right.
The point, is everybody pays a price that comes across. And until we actually secure a border, we won't be able to stop all of that wreckage. So I want to thank y'all for your comments today. We're going to get to audience Q&A before we close it out. But first question, Josh, is for you. You know, obviously we talked a lot about the issues in Mexico, and I would say the fact that Mexico is just a failed narco state at this point. And so it's clear that the federal government, through what Blinken and Mayorkas and others are doing, has no interest in holding Mexico accountable at all, the Mexican government accountable for what they're doing. What could Texas be doing, and what could other states be doing to maybe bring some accountability to the Mexican government?
Texas has pioneered what, to my mind, is the number one most effective way of holding the Mexican state accountable, which is implementing secondary inspections at ports of entry. Again, going back to the principle that the Mexican regime cares only about the commerce, cares only about the money, not about the welfare of its own citizens or anything like that. Governor Abbott and his team implemented secondary inspections, within the past 2 years, I think. And really what that is once you pass the federal point of entry, you then have a secondary inspection at a Texas-controlled point of entry. And what that does is it de facto either slows or shuts down cross-border trade, which is a huge, huge, huge issue on the Mexican side. And so that, you know, if I had to pick just one policy that could be implemented right now, I would do that. And I would do what the federal government has consistently refused to do, which is link trade and security. If you want the benefits of trade and commerce with the state of Texas, then you must deliver security on your side of the border. Until you do that, you shouldn't have the benefits of trade. So that's the number one thing. And then, you know, again, asking about the other states, I'll just repeat what I said earlier. I think other states should send their National Guard personnel to the U.S.-Mexico border. Happy to host them in Texas and participate in Operation Lone Star. So those would be my two immediate two-day policy answers.
Yeah, I love it. All right, so next question, I think this is a good one, is Biden said, "I've done all I can do. Just give me the power. Give me the Border Patrol. Give me the people and the judges." So can one of y'all, we'll start with you, Ammon. I think both of y'all probably have answers.
Both start
to this.
laughing at this.
Yeah. Can one of you explain what more power Biden wants on the border? What could he possibly need that he doesn't already have?
He already has everything. What he really wants is the naturalization process. So he's talking about these quote-unquote legal pathways to get into the United States. Now he wants the quote-unquote legal pathways to become an actual citizen. And so that naturalization pathway, in which he thinks is of naturalizing everyone that's coming to the U.S., that's really what he wants. And that's why he's for a bill to bring that about. But as it stands now, all he would have to do is enact the laws that are currently in place right now, and he would really shut everything down.
Just go back, just have an executive order. Hey, on January 19th, 2020, we're just going to do that again.
Yeah,
right?
we'll just do that again. Yeah.
Josh, anything you want to add to that?
I do want to take the opportunity here to highlight this supposed Senate bill that this deal is coming out that Ammon.
You got to my next question. Tell me about that.
Oh, well, fantastic.
Perfect.
Great
Go
minds.
ahead.
Great minds. No, so as of yesterday evening, nobody's actually read the Senate bill. So all we have is this cavalcade of leaks coming out. So maybe the actual bill as drafted will be something different. But what we're reading of the Senate bill is that it actually does not shut down the border, which they're defining very broadly. until you get an influx of 1.3 million, minimum 1.3 million illegal entries into the United States annually, which is an absolutely insane figure. Why not go for zero? I mean, that's question one. The other thing to eliminate is that back in, not too long ago, the Obama team was saying that 1,000 illegal entries a day was a crisis. Like that was an unsustainable number. It swamps the system. This reported Senate
Sounds
deal,
amazing now, right? Yeah.
This reported Senate deal envisions tolerating 5,000 illegal entries per day. So suddenly, like the system, I guess, has quintupled its capacity. It makes no sense. It's a fig leaf deal. I'll just say this. It's a deal so bad, so counterproductive, and so contrary to the interests of the American people that only the Senate leadership could endorse it.
Oh, I love that. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Ammon, so getting back, next question, on Shelby Park and Eagle Pass, how big is that park? How much of the border does it cover, and why are the feds so intent on reopening that particular point?
Sure. So it's about 2.5 miles. And the reason why they're so intent, like I said, the Mexican cartels and the smuggling organizations, they choose where they're sending the people up. So it wasn't that the Border Patrol said, hey, we're going to put an outdoor facility right here on Shelby Park. They put it there because the cartels and the smuggling organizations are like, this is where we're sending all the give-ups. And so Border Patrol, in reaction to that, put it on that park. That's the only reason why they chose that park. It's the only reason why they chose an area in Brownsville to do the same thing, or an area in Stark County. They're only choosing those specific areas because that's where the cartel chose for them.
Yeah, very good. All right, so I have two questions left, and before we close. So, Josh, obviously, we've talked a little bit about the buoy and razor wire one, but the Supreme Court lifted the injunction on the razor wire. Can you talk a little bit about what that means and kind of what the next steps are, especially on that case? But I think both of those cases would be interesting to give little updates on those.
Yeah, delving a little bit into kind of legal process here, in a tremendously disappointing 5-4 decision, including with Amy Coney Barrett and Justice Roberts joining with the majority, the Supreme Court lifted, without explaining the rationale, lifted the, I believe it's the Fifth Circuit's injunction that prohibited the feds from eradicating Texas border infrastructure. The feds now have the power to do so, but to his immense credit, Governor Abbott responded by the next day ordering the erection of more border barrier infrastructure, which the feds, interestingly enough, have hitherto failed to try to destroy. We'll see what happens. I agree with Ammon, by the way, that they'll probably take the tactic of persecuting low-level individuals within Texas DPS and National Guard. So right now, that case, the actual final adjudication of that case on the merits remains to be determined. It's going to go to trial. There's going to be some kind of a ruling on it, and we're going to get some judicial reasoning. I don't know when exactly. Typically we're going to get a decision as released in June, but that remains to be seen.
Great, that's fantastic. All right, so last question. So we've talked about a lot of, I would say, not fun things that are happening at the border, and it can really weigh you down, especially when you think about as we've talked about the human carnage that's part of this. But what makes you hopeful, or maybe there's nothing, but is there anything that makes you hopeful about what is happening at the border and what we can do to maybe actually solve this crisis? And I'll start with you, Ammon, and then go to you, Josh.
Sure. To be honest, it's a couple things. It's the statements by Attorney General Paxton. I know many landowners that are suffering, and many people that are being trafficked are suffering, that have been waiting for this type of rhetoric and legal action by the state of Texas. So that brings me hope. And then also, what also brings me hope is the backing of other states, that we are not alone. We're not alone in this fight, and we have the backing of other states in this. They're going to be maybe sending their National Guard, but they may be just backing us legally. I guess that's somewhat of the only hope. The issue that I have, I guess, like you said, it is kind of dismal. In the 82nd legislature, they hired 2 generals to assess the border. And back then, those 2 generals stated the threat of the Mexican cartels and the national security threats that our current ranchers at that time we're receiving. And unfortunately, here we are a decade later. And so, but the recent actions by our governor and the Attorney General, it does bring me hope that there is some light in the future.
Yeah, someone's going to stand up for Texas and Texans. Josh?
I share with Ammon the cause for optimism, and that the states are finally standing up after a century of progressive stripping away of their prerogatives and sovereignty. Texas is pushing back. That's fantastic. One other reason I will say for optimism, we've talked a lot about what's going on in Mexico with the Mexican state, with the cartels there, with everything like that. But I will tell you firsthand, you've met some of them as well. There are Mexicans who want to do the right thing, who want a strong, sovereign, prosperous Mexico undergirded by rule of law that does its best by Mexican citizens, which means they'll be a good neighbor to us in Texas. And I think ultimately the combination of Texans in the state standing up and also Mexicans standing up in Mexico to do the right thing is what's going to see us through this in the long run.
Yeah, amen. Well, Ammon, Josh, thank you all for joining us today and talking about this really important issue. And as we close out, I think there's a lot of existential crises that the left has put on the American people and on Texas. Probably none more acutely existential than what is happening at the border. But as Josh and Ammon pointed out, seeing our governor and our attorney general and lieutenant governor and everyone stand up in the state, and a lot of the governors around the country rally behind Texas, shows me that people are awake to what is actually happening. And the good news is that people like Ammon and Josh, Rodney and Celine and Melissa and the whole team here at TPF, we will not stop fighting until we end the cartel influence on our border, and we end the cartels and human trafficking associated with it, and we finally secure our border. So thank you all for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful Tuesday.